Welcome back to Philosophia Mental, and we are going to break down and talk about the philosophy book, Big Ideas Simply Explained. Each section dives deeply into the core ideas and historical context of major philosophical movements, and key figures in the development of Western philosophy. Let's get right into it. What is philosophy? This opening section explores the basic question of what philosophy truly is. It defines philosophy as the pursuit of wisdom through reasoning and systematic inquiry into fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, ethics, and reason. The section emphasizes that philosophy is an intellectual pursuit not confined to academia but one that arises from human curiosity. It is the search for answers to universal questions like, what is the nature of the universe, and how should we live? These explorations go beyond just logical reasoning. They reflect humanity's desire to understand life and our role within it. It contrasts philosophy with religious or mythological explanations by focusing on questioning and rational thinking. 2. The Pre-Socratics and Early Philosophers. This section dives into the earliest philosophical thinkers in ancient Greece, such as Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, and Pythagoras. These early philosophers were driven by the need to explain the natural world without relying on gods or myths. Thales, for instance, suggested that water was the fundamental substance of all life. Anaximander proposed a boundless substance called apeiron as the origin of everything. Heraclitus focused on the idea that change is central to the universe, famously stating, "You cannot step into the same river twice." These thinkers were key in shifting from mythological explanations to a more naturalistic worldview, thus setting the stage for future philosophical inquiry. 3. Socrates and the development of rational thought. Socrates is introduced as a pivotal figure in the history of philosophy. He introduced the method of questioning that bears his name, the Socratic method, which is a form of cooperative argumentative dialogue aimed at stimulating critical thinking. Socrates believed that true wisdom came from recognizing one's own ignorance. He famously declared, "I know that I am intelligent because I know that I know nothing." Through his dialogues, Socrates sought to uncover fundamental truths by asking probing questions. His approach marked a departure from traditional philosophical thinking by focusing on ethics and the nature of human virtue. He was tried and sentenced to death for corrupting the youth of Athens, but his legacy continued through the works of his disciples, especially Plato. 4. Plato's ideas and the theory of forms. Plato, Socrates' student, takes the stage in this section with his revolutionary ideas, especially the theory of forms. Plato posited that the world we perceive with our senses is just a shadow of a higher, more perfect realm of abstract forms or ideas. For instance, the physical chair we sit in is just a copy of the ideal form of a chair. These forms represent perfect versions of concepts like justice, beauty, and equality. Plato's belief in the forms implies that the material world is unreliable and deceptive, while knowledge of the forms comes through reason and intellect. Plato's writings, particularly in the Republic, explored the nature of justice, the ideal state, and the role of philosophers as rulers. This section also covers his establishment of the Academy, one of the first institutions of higher learning in the Western world. 5. Aristotle's empirical approach. Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, is depicted as a philosopher who shifted the focus from abstract, idealistic thinking to practical, empirical observation. While Plato emphasized the world of forms, Aristotle believed that knowledge comes from the physical world itself, and to understand it, one must observe it. He laid the groundwork for many modern sciences by categorizing knowledge and establishing methods for studying biology, physics, and other fields. Aristotle's system of logic, known as syllogism, helped shape reasoning in a structured way. He also explored ethics, claiming that virtue lies in finding a balance between extremes, the doctrine of the golden mean. His ideas about politics, ethics, and logic are foundational to Western thought and continue to influence philosophy and science. 6. Epicureanism and Stoicism, the pursuit of happiness. This section introduces two major Hellenistic schools of thought, Epicureanism and Stoicism, both of which offered philosophies centered around achieving happiness. Epicureanism, founded by Epicurus, taught that pleasure is the greatest good, but it emphasized mental over physical pleasure, advocating for modesty and friendship. In contrast, Stoicism, founded by Zeno of Citium, proposed that virtue and wisdom are the keys to true happiness, and that we should live in harmony with nature. Stoics believe that happiness comes from accepting the world as it is, focusing on what we can control, and maintaining a rational mind in the face of adversity. Both philosophies sought to provide guidance on how to live a fulfilled life amidst the challenges of the human condition. 7. The rise of Christianity and the influence on philosophy. Here, the philosophical narrative turns toward the influence of early Christian thought on Western philosophy. Christian philosophers, such as Augustine, sought to reconcile the teachings of Christianity with classical philosophy. Augustine integrated ideas from Plato into Christian theology, emphasizing the existence of a perfect, divine realm and the importance of the soul. This section also touches upon the development of medieval scholasticism, where thinkers like Thomas Aquinas tried to merge faith with reason, exploring topics such as the existence of God and the relationship between faith and science. This blend of Christian thought and classical philosophy deeply shaped the philosophical landscape of the Middle Ages. 8. Rationalism and empiricism, the battle of the philosophers. This section addresses the philosophical divide between rationalism and empiricism. Rationalists, like René Descartes, believe that knowledge comes from reason and that certain truths are innate. Descartes, famous for his statement, cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, argued that the mind is the source of all knowledge. On the other hand, empiricists, such as John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume, contended that knowledge comes from sensory experience and that we learn about the world through our interactions with it. This philosophical debate has profound implications for the development of modern science and the understanding of human cognition. 9. The Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. The Enlightenment marked a period of intellectual flourishing in the 17th and 18th centuries, where reason, science, and skepticism toward authority took center stage. Philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Immanuel Kant challenged traditional power structures, advocating for individual liberty, democracy, and human rights. Kant's idea of the categorical imperative emphasized moral duty and rational action as universal principles. The Enlightenment's focus on human reason and progress greatly influenced political revolutions and the development of modern democratic societies. 10. German idealism and Hegel's philosophy of history. This section introduces German idealism, particularly the work of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who argued that history unfolds through a dialectical process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Hegel believed that history is a rational process and that human freedom evolves through these dialectical movements, culminating in the realization of true freedom. His idea that reality is shaped by ideas and the collective consciousness of societies was revolutionary, influencing later thinkers like Marx. Hegel's work established the groundwork for later philosophical movements, particularly in the realm of political theory. 11. Utilitarianism, the greatest happiness principle. This section delves into the philosophy of utilitarianism, which argues that the best action is the one that maximizes happiness for the greatest number of people. John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham are central figures here. Bentham proposed that moral actions should be judged by their outcomes, specifically the pleasure and pain they generate. Mill expanded on Bentham's ideas by considering the quality of pleasures, not just the quantity. Utilitarianism has been influential in ethics, politics, and law, with a focus on practical decision-making aimed at promoting collective well-being. 12. Existentialism, the philosophy of freedom. Existentialism, associated with thinkers like Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus, focuses on individual freedom, choice, and the absurdity of existence. Existentialists argue that life has no inherent meaning, and it is up to each individual to create their own purpose. Sartre famously declared that existence precedes essence, meaning we are not defined by any predetermined essence or nature but by what we choose to become. This philosophical movement explores themes of alienation, anxiety, and the search for meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe. 13. Marxism, the theory of historical materialism. This section introduces Karl Marx's philosophy, particularly his theory of historical materialism, which asserts that the economic structure of society shapes its social, political, and ideological systems. Marx believed that class struggle is the driving force of history, and that capitalism inherently leads to exploitation and inequality. His ideas, which include the concept of the dialectical materialism, argued that revolution by the working class would eventually lead to the establishment of a classless society. Marxism has had a profound influence on political thought and movements around the world. 14. Pragmatism, philosophy in action. Pragmatism, popularized by philosophers like Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, and John Dewey, emphasizes the practical application of ideas and the testing of theories through experience and consequences. Pragmatists reject the idea of absolute truths and argue that the meaning of concepts or theories lies in their practical effects. This philosophy has been particularly influential in American thought, where it has been used to address real-world issues in education, politics, and ethics. 15. Phenomenology, the study of experience. Phenomenology, associated with Edmund Husserl and later Martin Heidegger and Maurice Merleau-Ponty, investigates the structures of experience and consciousness. Husserl's method focuses on bracketing or setting aside assumptions to examine how things appear to consciousness. This approach seeks to explore subjective experience in its purest form, without preconceived theories or frameworks. Heidegger, influenced by phenomenology, explored the nature of being itself, suggesting that our understanding of the world is deeply intertwined with our existence as individuals. 16. Structuralism and post-structuralism, the role of language and power. This section examines structuralism, a school of thought that views human culture as a system of underlying structures, especially language. Ferdinand de Saussure's ideas about linguistics and semiotics laid the groundwork for structuralism. Later, post-structuralist thinkers like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault challenged structuralism's focus on fixed meanings, arguing that meanings are always shifting and shaped by power relations. Post-structuralism rejects the notion of objective truths and emphasizes the fluidity of identity, language, and culture. 17. Analytic philosophy, clarity and logic. Analytic philosophy emerged in the early 20th century with figures such as Bertrand Russell, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and G. E. Moore. It emphasizes clarity of expression, logical analysis, and precision in argumentation. One key development in analytic philosophy is the focus on the language we use to discuss philosophical issues. Wittgenstein, for instance, argued that philosophical problems arise from misunderstandings of language. This approach has had a lasting impact on the philosophy of language, logic, and science. 18. The philosophy of science, the nature of scientific knowledge. The philosophy of science examines the foundations, methods, and implications of scientific inquiry. Key figures in this field, like Karl Popper, Thomas Kuhn, and Imre Lakatos, have explored how scientific theories are developed, tested, and falsified. Popper introduced the idea of falsifiability as a criterion for distinguishing scientific theories from non-scientific ones. Kuhn's work focused on the structure of scientific revolutions, arguing that science progresses through paradigm shifts. This section reflects on how scientific knowledge differs from other forms of knowledge and the ways it evolves over time. 19. Feminist philosophy, gender and power. Feminist philosophy addresses issues of gender, power, and the social construction of identities. Thinkers like Simone de Beauvoir, Betty Friedan, and Judith Butler have critiqued traditional philosophical views of women and gender. Beauvoir's work, particularly The Second Sex, argues that women have historically been defined in relation to men and that this social construct limits their freedom. Feminist philosophy seeks to deconstruct these ideas and examine how gender intersects with race, class, and other factors to shape identity and experience. 20. Critical theory, the Frankfurt School and social critique. Critical theory, developed by members of the Frankfurt School like Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, and Herbert Marcuse, critiques the ways in which culture, ideology, and power structures perpetuate inequality and social injustice. This section discusses how critical theorists analyze capitalism, mass media, and modern culture, emphasizing the need to challenge oppressive systems. The Frankfurt School's work laid the foundation for later social and political movements, particularly those related to liberation and social justice. 21. Postcolonial philosophy, identity, culture, and resistance. Postcolonial philosophy emerged in response to the legacy of colonialism and its impact on identity, culture, and power relations. Thinkers like Frantz Fanon, Edward Said, and Gayatri Spivak explore how colonialism shaped the modern world and how formerly colonized peoples resist and redefine their identities. Fanon's work, particularly in Black Skin, White Masks, examines the psychological effects of colonialism, while Said's concept of Orientalism critiques Western representations of the East. This philosophy challenges the dominance of Western narratives and explores the dynamics of power in a post-colonial world. 22. Environmental philosophy, ethics and the earth. Environmental philosophy focuses on the moral relationship between humans and the natural world. It explores questions of sustainability, conservation, and our ethical responsibilities toward the environment. Philosophers like Aldo Leopold, Arne Naess, and Peter Singer argue for a more ecocentric approach, where the value of nature is recognized beyond its utility to humans. Environmental philosophy also addresses the ethics of climate change, biodiversity loss, and the exploitation of natural resources. 23. Philosophy of mind, consciousness and the self. This section explores the nature of consciousness, self-awareness, and personal identity. Philosophers like René Descartes, John Locke, and more recently, Daniel Dennett, have explored the relationship between the mind and the body. Descartes' dualism, for instance, posits that mind and body are separate entities, while contemporary philosophers of mind, like Dennett, argue for a more materialistic view of consciousness as emerging from brain processes. The problem of personal identity, or what makes someone, themselves, over time, is another key topic in this field. 24. Ethics, the study of morality. Ethics is the branch of philosophy concerned with moral principles and the question of what constitutes right and wrong behavior. From the ancient Greeks to modern philosophers, ethics has been central to philosophical inquiry. Thinkers like Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, and John Stuart Mill developed various ethical frameworks, such as virtue ethics, deontological ethics, and utilitarianism. This section examines these ethical theories, exploring questions about duty, happiness, and justice. 25. Political philosophy, theories of justice and the state. Political philosophy deals with questions about the nature of justice, law, and the role of the state. Figures like Plato, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and Marx have offered different views on the ideal structure of society and governance. Plato's ideal state in the Republic contrasts with Hobbes' view of an absolute monarchy as necessary to prevent chaos. Rousseau's concept of the social contract and Marx's critique of capitalism represent key political ideas that continue to shape discussions of freedom, equality, and power. 26. Aesthetics, the philosophy of art and beauty. Aesthetics explores the nature of beauty, art, and taste. Philosophers like Plato, Immanuel Kant, and Arthur Schopenhauer have written extensively on the nature of aesthetic experience and the role of art in society. Plato viewed art as a mere imitation of reality, whereas Kant saw aesthetic judgment as a form of universal and subjective experience. Aesthetics today includes a wide range of topics, including the ethics of art, the interpretation of artistic works, and the social impact of cultural products. 27. The absurd, Camus and the search for meaning. Albert Camus' philosophy, particularly his notion of the absurd, examines the tension between human desire for meaning and the apparent meaninglessness of the universe. Camus argues that life's lack of inherent purpose is not a reason for despair but a reason to embrace freedom and create our own meaning. His ideas, especially in works like The Myth of Sisyphus, emphasize the importance of living authentically in the face of absurdity. 28. Philosophy of Religion, Faith and Reason. Philosophy of religion explores the rational arguments for and against the existence of God and examines the relationship between faith and reason. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, Immanuel Kant, and William James have addressed topics such as the problem of evil, the nature of divine revelation, and the compatibility of science and religion. This section explores both traditional arguments for theism and critiques from atheists and agnostics. 29. Theories of Knowledge, What Can We Know? This section addresses epistemology, the study of knowledge. It explores questions about what knowledge is, how it is acquired, and the limits of human understanding. Key figures like René Descartes, who famously doubted everything except his own existence, cogito, ergo sum, and Immanuel Kant, who argued that our knowledge is shaped by the structures of our minds, are central to this discussion. The section explores various theories, such as empiricism, knowledge through sensory experience, rationalism, knowledge through reason, and skepticism, the doubt that knowledge is possible.
30. The concept of freedom, free will versus determinism. Philosophers have long debated the nature of freedom, and whether human actions are determined by forces beyond our control. This section contrasts views like free will, where individuals have the power to make independent choices, and determinism, which suggests that all events, including human actions, are determined by preceding causes. Key figures such as John Locke, who believed in natural rights and individual liberty, and determinists like Baruch Spinoza, who argued that everything, including human action, is governed by natural laws, are central to this discussion. 31. Social contract theory, the foundation of political authority. This section explores social contract theory, which proposes that individuals consent to form societies and governments that protect their rights in exchange for some personal freedoms. Thomas Hobbes, in Leviathan, argued that in the state of nature, life would be solitary, poor and nasty, brutish and short, and thus, people must submit to an absolute ruler for peace. John Locke, in contrast, emphasized limited government and the protection of natural rights, while Jean-Jacques Rousseau proposed the idea of the general will and direct democracy. 32. The meaning of life, existential questions and responses. This section explores various philosophical perspectives on the meaning of life, which has been a central issue in existentialism, religion, and ethics. Philosophers like Camus, who argued that life is inherently meaningless, but we can still create meaning through our actions, and Nietzsche, who challenged the concept of objective meaning in life, are key figures. Additionally, religious philosophers such as Augustine and Thomas Aquinas offered views on the purpose of life within the context of divine creation. 33. The concept of justice, fairness, and rights. This section discusses the philosophical notion of justice, which has been interpreted in various ways over time. Plato's Republic outlines his vision of justice as harmony in the state and the individual soul, while Aristotle emphasizes justice as fairness and the equal treatment of equals. Modern theories of justice, such as those presented by John Rawls in A Theory of Justice, focus on fairness and the veil of ignorance as a way to design just societies. 34. The philosophy of language, how words shape reality. The philosophy of language examines how words and symbols convey meaning and how they shape our understanding of the world. Figures like Ludwig Wittgenstein argued that the meaning of words is grounded in their use within specific language games. Other thinkers, like Ferdinand de Saussure, emphasized the role of language in constructing social reality through signs and symbols. The section explores how language can both reveal and limit our ability to grasp the truth. 35. Moral relativism, the subjectivity of morality. Moral relativism is the idea that moral principles are not absolute and can vary based on culture, society, or individual perspective. This section explores the tension between moral relativism and moral absolutism, the belief that there are universal moral truths. Thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche critiqued traditional moral systems, while others, like Ruth Benedict, argued that moral codes are culturally determined. This philosophical view has profound implications for understanding issues of ethics across different societies. 36. The problem of evil. Can a good God exist? The problem of evil addresses the challenge of reconciling the existence of evil in the world with the idea of an all-powerful, all-good God. Philosophers like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas attempted to argue that evil is the result of human free will and the absence of good. In contrast, thinkers like David Hume and J.L. Mackie challenged these arguments, raising questions about the logical consistency of the existence of evil alongside divine goodness. This section explores various theodicies that attempt to solve this philosophical problem. 37. Political ideologies, liberalism, conservatism, and beyond. This section outlines key political ideologies that have shaped modern political thought. Liberalism, as discussed by John Locke and John Stuart Mill, emphasizes individual rights, democracy, and freedom from oppressive authority. Conservatism, represented by figures like Edmund Burke, advocates for tradition, stability, and gradual change. Other ideologies like socialism, anarchism, and fascism are also explored, highlighting the various ways thinkers have approached questions of governance, power, and equality. 38. The philosophy of time, past, present, and future. The philosophy of time examines the nature of time and its relation to reality. Thinkers like St. Augustine pondered the existence of time itself, questioning whether the past and future are real or only exist in the present. Modern philosophers, such as Henri Bergson, emphasize the subjective experience of time, while others, like Jamie McTaggart, argue that time may not even exist in the way we perceive it. This section explores metaphysical and scientific perspectives on the passage of time. 39. The mind-body problem. How are they connected? The mind-body problem addresses the relationship between mental states, such as thoughts and emotions, and physical states, such as brain activity. René Descartes' dualism posited that the mind and body are separate, while materialists like Thomas Hobbes argued that the mind is simply a product of the physical brain. Contemporary debates center around whether consciousness can be explained solely by neuroscience or if it requires additional, non-physical explanations. 40. The unconscious mind, Freud and psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud's theory of the unconscious revolutionized psychology and philosophy by proposing that much of human behavior is driven by unconscious desires and repressed memories. Freud's work on the structure of the psyche, id, ego, and superego, shaped modern understandings of human motivation. This section explores the implications of Freud's ideas for philosophy, ethics, and human behavior, as well as critiques from other thinkers like Carl Jung and Jacques Lacan. 41. Nihilism, the rejection of meaning. Nihilism, as explored in the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, holds that life lacks inherent meaning, value, or purpose. Nietzsche's declaration that God is dead reflects his belief that traditional values no longer provided a basis for meaning in life. Nihilism challenges conventional moral and social structures, leading to both despair and the potential for liberation through the creation of new values. 42. Philosophy of history. How can we understand the past? This section examines the philosophy of history, focusing on how we interpret historical events and the role of historians in shaping our understanding of the past. Thinkers like George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel and Karl Marx propose theories about historical progress, with Hegel seeing history as a rational unfolding of ideas and Marx viewing history as driven by class struggles. This section explores whether history has a direction or purpose and how philosophical analysis impacts our interpretation of historical events. 43. Ethics of technology, the future of humanity. Ethics of technology explores the moral implications of technological advancements, including artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and environmental impacts. Thinkers like Martin Heidegger warned of the dangers of technology alienating humanity from nature, while others like Nick Bostrom have explored the ethical dilemmas surrounding AI and the future of humanity. This section asks how technology should be ethically governed and what it means for human identity and society. 44. The philosophy of war, just war and pacifism. Philosophers have long debated the morality of war, with some arguing for the justifications of war, just war theory, and others advocating for pacifism. Figures like Thomas Aquinas developed just war theory, which outlines the conditions under which war can be considered morally just. In contrast, pacifists like Leo Tolstoy and Mahatma Gandhi argued for nonviolent resistance. This section explores the ethical considerations of warfare, the right to self-defense, and the role of international law. 45. Transhumanism, the enhancement of humanity. Transhumanism is a philosophy that advocates for using technology to enhance human capabilities and transcend biological limitations. Thinkers like Ray Kurzweil and Nick Bostrom argue that through advancements in biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology, humans could significantly improve their cognitive abilities, lifespan, and even achieve immortality. This section explores the ethical, social, and existential implications of transcending our natural state. 46. The philosophy of sport, competition, and fair play. This section examines the role of sport in society and the philosophical questions surrounding competition, fairness, and ethics. It explores concepts like sportsmanship, the moral implications of doping, and the nature of competition. Philosophers like Albert Kriekmans have written about the moral significance of sports and the role they play in the cultivation of virtue. 47. The philosophy of happiness. What is the good life? This section explores various philosophical theories about happiness and the good life. Thinkers like Aristotle, who defined happiness as eudaimonia, flourishing through virtue, and John Stuart Mill, who focused on pleasure as the ultimate good, offer different. 48. The ethics of animal rights, our moral duty to animals. This section delves into the moral consideration of animals within ethical frameworks. It explores the arguments for animal rights, which gained prominence through philosophers like Peter Singer and Tom Regan. Singer's utilitarian approach emphasizes minimizing suffering, while Regan argues that animals possess inherent rights similar to humans. This section contrasts these views with anthropocentric, human-centered approaches, which argue that human interests take precedence. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who viewed animals as means to human ends, are also discussed, alongside contemporary debates over animal experimentation, factory farming, and veganism. 49. Philosophy and the environment, ethical challenges. In this section, environmental philosophy examines the moral status of nature and the responsibilities humans have toward the environment. Deep ecology, championed by thinkers like Arne Naess, argues for an intrinsic value in all living beings, advocating for a shift from human-centered ethics to one that respects the interconnectedness of life. Other perspectives, such as those offered by Aldo Leopold's land ethic and ecofeminism, propose that environmental destruction is tied to broader societal and gender inequalities. This section engages with the moral imperatives to preserve ecosystems, reduce pollution, and address climate change.
50. The ethics of artificial intelligence. Can machines be moral? This section explores the ethical questions raised by artificial intelligence, AI, and robotics. It covers the moral implications of creating machines that may one day surpass human intelligence. Thinkers like John Searle, who proposed the Chinese room argument to challenge AI consciousness, and Nick Bostrom, who cautions against the risks of superintelligent AI, are central to the discussion. The section also considers the moral status of AI, whether machines could ever have rights, and the potential consequences of autonomous decision-making systems. It challenges readers to think about how we should ethically design and control AI in the future. 51. The nature of reality. What is real? This section explores metaphysical questions regarding the nature of reality. Philosophers like Plato, who posited that the physical world is an imperfect reflection of ideal forms, and René Descartes, who questioned the nature of reality with his skepticism, I think, therefore I am, are key figures. It also touches on modern views such as those proposed by quantum physicists, who argue that reality might not be as solid or deterministic as we once believed. The section raises the question of whether we can ever truly know what is real or if our perception distorts it. 52. The philosophy of science, understanding the universe. The philosophy of science examines how scientific knowledge is produced and its relationship with truth. Philosophers like Karl Popper, who introduced the concept of falsifiability as a criterion for scientific theories, and Thomas Kuhn, who explored the idea of paradigm shifts in scientific revolutions, are central to this discussion. This section addresses how science seeks to explain the universe and the limitations of scientific understanding, such as the problem of induction. How can we know what will happen in the future based on past observations? 53. The Self, Who Are We? This section delves into the nature of the self, identity, and personal experience. Philosophers like John Locke, who argued that personal identity is tied to continuity of consciousness, and David Hume, who believed the self is nothing more than a bundle of perceptions, are key figures. The section explores concepts of selfhood, the mind-body problem, and modern issues like the role of the self in a digital world. 54. Philosophy of Religion, the Existence of God. This section tackles the existence of God, addressing arguments for and against the divine. Classic arguments for God's existence, such as the cosmological argument, everything has a cause, the teleological argument, the design of the universe implies a designer, and the ontological argument, God's existence is inherent in the concept of God, are explored. Figures like Thomas Aquinas and William Paley offer important perspectives, while skeptics like David Hume and Friedrich Nietzsche argue against traditional theism. 55. Feminist Philosophy, Gender, Equality, and Liberation. Feminist philosophy examines the social and political implications of gender, focusing on issues like equality, power, and the oppression of women. Figures like Simone de Beauvoir, who argued that women have been historically defined as the other, and Judith Butler, who explored gender as a social construct, are central to this discussion. The section also addresses feminist critiques of traditional philosophy, particularly its tendency to marginalize women's perspectives. 56. The Ethics of War, Just War and Pacifism. This section focuses on the philosophical considerations of war, exploring whether war can ever be morally justified. Just war theory, first articulated by thinkers like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, examines when it is acceptable to engage in war. In contrast, pacifists like Leo Tolstoy argue that non-violence is the only ethical response. The section also considers modern challenges like the ethics of nuclear warfare and humanitarian interventions. 57. The Social Contract, Origins of Political Authority. The idea of the social contract examines the origins of political authority and the legitimacy of governments. Thinkers like Thomas Hobbes, who argued for a powerful, central authority to avoid chaos, and John Locke, who advocated for limited government and individual rights, are key figures. The section also explores Jean-Jacques Rousseau's notion of the general will, and its implications for democracy and political legitimacy. 58. Political Philosophy, Liberty, Equality, and Justice. This section examines different political ideologies, focusing on concepts like liberty, equality, and justice. John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism advocates for the greatest happiness principle, while Karl Marx critiqued capitalist systems and called for a classless society. The section also looks at liberalism, conservatism, and socialism, exploring the strengths and weaknesses of each political philosophy and its approach to achieving justice. 59. Ethics of Technology, the Impact of Innovation. This section explores the ethical questions raised by technological advances, including artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and environmental impacts. The ethics of innovation and the responsibility of creators to consider the social implications of their inventions are discussed. Philosophers like Martin Heidegger, who warned of technology's potential to alienate humans from nature, and contemporary thinkers like Nick Bostrom, who addresses the risks of superintelligent AI, are featured. 60. The Mind-Body Problem, Consciousness and the Brain. The mind-body problem addresses the relationship between the mind, or consciousness, and the body, the physical brain. Dualists like René Descartes argued that the mind and body are separate, while materialists like Thomas Hobbes and contemporary neuroscientists claim that consciousness is purely the result of physical brain processes. This section also explores modern debates about the nature of consciousness and whether it can be fully explained by neuroscience. 61. Moral realism versus anti-realism, the nature of moral facts. This section explores the debate between moral realism, the belief that there are objective moral facts, and moral anti-realism, the view that moral facts are not objective. Philosophers like G. E. Moore and Derek Parfit argue for moral realism, asserting that moral truths exist independently of human opinion. In contrast, figures like J. L. Mackie and Richard Rorty argue for moral anti-realism, suggesting that moral values are human constructions. 62. The problem of evil: can a good God exist? The problem of evil addresses the challenge of reconciling the existence of suffering and evil with the notion of an all-powerful, all-good God. Classical theodicies, like those offered by Augustine and Leibniz, suggest that evil is a consequence of free will or a necessary part of a greater divine plan. In contrast, skeptics like David Hume and J. L. Mackie argue that the existence of evil is incompatible with the existence of an omnipotent and benevolent God. 63. The meaning of life, existentialism and the search for purpose. This section examines existentialism, a philosophical movement focused on the individual's quest for meaning in an indifferent or even absurd universe. Figures like Jean-Paul Sartre, who argued that existence precedes essence and that we must create our own meaning, and Albert Camus, who explored the absurdity of life, are central. The section also touches on religious responses to the question of life's meaning, such as those provided by Christianity and Buddhism. 64. Nihilism, the rejection of meaning. Nihilism is the philosophical view that life has no inherent meaning or value. Friedrich Nietzsche is often associated with nihilism, particularly his declaration that God is dead, and his exploration of the implications of this loss of meaning. The section examines the emotional and existential impact of nihilism, along with responses from philosophers like Camus, who argued that we can still create our own meaning in an otherwise meaningless world. 65. The philosophy of history, understanding the past. The philosophy of history addresses questions about the meaning and interpretation of historical events. Thinkers like George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel and Karl Marx proposed theories of historical progress, suggesting that history unfolds according to certain principles or inevitable forces. This section also explores postmodern critiques of grand historical narratives, emphasizing the role of individual perspectives in shaping our understanding of history. 66. The nature of time. What is time? This section examines philosophical theories about the nature of time, including whether it is an objective feature of the universe or a subjective experience. Thinkers like St. Augustine, who pondered whether time exists or is merely a human construct, and J.M.E. McTaggart, who argued that time is an illusion, are key figures. The section also explores contemporary views in physics, including Einstein's theory of relativity and its implications for our understanding of time. 67. The philosophy of mind, consciousness and personal identity. The philosophy of mind explores the nature of consciousness and personal identity. Key questions include how consciousness arises and whether it can be fully explained by physical processes. Dualists like Descartes argue that the mind and body are distinct, while materialists maintain that consciousness is a result of brain activity. This section also touches on contemporary debates about the nature of selfhood and whether personal identity persists over time. 68. Philosophy of language. How do words mean? This section explores how language shapes our understanding of the world. Ludwig Wittgenstein's later philosophy, which emphasizes the role of language in creating meaning through social practices, is a central focus. The section also discusses the work of Ferdinand de Saussure, who explored the structural nature of language, and contemporary theories that look at how language is used to convey meaning in context. 69. The ethics of abortion, rights and moral status. This section tackles the ethical issues surrounding abortion, exploring debates about the rights of the fetus, the rights of the mother, and when life begins. Philosophers like Judith Jarvis Thomson, who offered the famous violinist analogy to argue for a woman's right to choose, and Don Marquis, who contends that abortion is immoral because the fetus has a future like ours, are discussed. The section addresses the moral complexities of abortion and reproductive rights. 70. Moral philosophy, the right and the good. This section explores the basic principles of moral philosophy, focusing on the distinction between what is right and what is good. It examines key ethical theories, such as deontology, which emphasizes duty and rules, e.g., Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, and consequentialism, which focuses on the outcomes of actions, e.g., utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill. The section delves into the implications of these theories for everyday moral decisions, asking what makes an action morally right or good. 71. The ethics of euthanasia, life and death decisions. The ethical dilemmas surrounding euthanasia and assisted suicide are explored in this section. It examines the philosophical questions of whether it is morally permissible for individuals to end their own lives or for others to assist in such decisions. Thinkers like John Locke, who emphasizes individual rights, and critics such as Judith Jarvis Thomson, who explores the nuances of moral rights to life and death, provide insight into the complexities of this issue. 72. The concept of free will, are we truly free? This section tackles the debate over whether humans possess true free will or if our actions are determined by prior causes. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and William James argue that free will is essential for human agency, while determinists like Baruch Spinoza and modern neuroscientists suggest that all actions are a result of prior events, including brain activity. This section also examines the implications of this debate for moral responsibility and accountability. 73. The problem of personal identity, who am I? Exploring the nature of personal identity, this section asks whether we remain the same person throughout our lives or whether we are constantly changing. Key figures include John Locke, who proposed that personal identity is tied to memory, and David Hume, who argued that the self is just a bundle of perceptions. Modern philosophers and neuroscientists continue to explore how our memories, bodies, and consciousness interact to form our sense of self. 74. The philosophy of knowledge, what can we know? This section addresses the epistemological question of what we can truly know. Classical epistemology, as proposed by René Descartes, emphasized doubt as a path to certainty, cogito, ergo sum. It also delves into empiricism, as championed by philosophers like John Locke and David Hume, who argue that knowledge comes primarily from sensory experience. The section also explores skepticism, which questions whether knowledge is even possible. 75. The theory of knowledge, is knowledge possible? Building on the previous section, this part explores deeper questions about the nature of knowledge. It investigates the limits of human understanding, including issues such as the problem of induction, which challenges the reliability of generalizing from past experience. It also considers the role of perception, reason, and intuition in acquiring knowledge, touching on the work of Immanuel Kant and modern philosophers like Alvin Plantinga. 76. The philosophy of aesthetics, the nature of beauty. This section examines the philosophical study of art, beauty, and taste. It looks at the ways in which we assess and appreciate beauty in nature, art, and human creations. Philosophers like Plato, who linked beauty to the ideal forms, and Immanuel Kant, who argued that beauty is a subjective experience based on human faculties, are central to this discussion. The section explores how different cultures and philosophers interpret what is aesthetically valuable. 77. Philosophy and literature, the intersection of thought and art. This section explores how philosophical ideas influence literature and vice versa. Philosophers such as Albert Camus, who wrote novels exploring existentialist themes, and Friedrich Nietzsche, whose ideas on the Übermensch and the will to power resonated deeply in literature, are discussed. The section also examines the role of storytelling in conveying philosophical concepts, asking how literature can provide insights into the human condition. 78. The nature of language, how do words mean? Focusing on the philosophy of language, this section explores how language functions to convey meaning. Ludwig Wittgenstein's theory of language games suggests that the meaning of words is rooted in their use within specific social contexts. It also discusses structuralism, as presented by Ferdinand de Saussure, which posits that language is a system of signs and meanings that are interdependent. 79. Ethical relativism, the debate over universal morality. Ethical relativism argues that moral principles are not universal but are relative to particular cultures or societies. This section explores the implications of this view, addressing critiques from philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who argued for universal moral laws. It also examines the challenges ethical relativism presents in global contexts, where moral norms might conflict, and explores the possibility of universal human rights. 80. The ethics of capital punishment, morality and justice. The ethics of capital punishment are debated in this section, exploring whether the state has the right to take a life. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who argued that capital punishment is a necessary deterrent and retribution for certain crimes, are contrasted with abolitionists who argue that the death penalty is morally wrong and often unjust. The section also looks at modern debates surrounding the death penalty and its application in different legal systems. 81. Theories of justice, fairness and equality. This section explores different theories of justice, from John Rawls' theory of justice as fairness, which advocates for social and economic inequalities to be arranged in a way that benefits the least advantaged, to utilitarian views that aim for the greatest good for the greatest number. It also touches on libertarianism, which emphasizes individual freedom and minimal government intervention, and the challenges each theory faces in real-world application. 82. The problem of knowledge, the limits of understanding. This section tackles the limitations of human knowledge and our ability to understand the world. It examines the skeptical position, which asserts that we cannot be certain of anything, and contrasts it with epistemic optimism, which believes that knowledge is possible. It also looks at the idea that there may be limits to human understanding due to the limitations of our senses or cognitive capacities. 83. The philosophy of history, can we learn from the past? The philosophy of history examines the interpretation of historical events and whether we can derive meaningful lessons from them. Thinkers like George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who proposed that history unfolds through dialectical processes, and Karl Marx, who argued that history is shaped by material conditions, are explored. The section also considers whether history is guided by purpose or chance. 84. The politics of liberty, freedom versus authority. This section addresses the tension between individual liberty and state authority. It examines political philosophers such as John Locke, who advocated for limited government to protect individual freedoms, and Thomas Hobbes, who argued for absolute sovereignty to maintain social order. The section explores the challenges of balancing personal freedom with the need for collective security and governance. 85. Philosophy and technology, the impact of machines on humanity. This section explores the ethical and philosophical implications of technological advances. Philosophers like Martin Heidegger, who warned of technology's potential to alienate us from nature, and contemporary thinkers who discuss the implications of artificial intelligence and robotics, are key. The section examines the role of technology in shaping human experience and how it might influence future society. 86. The philosophy of money, economics and morality. This section examines the moral implications of economics and money. It looks at the philosophy of capitalism and socialism, comparing ideas like Adam Smith's concept of the invisible hand and Karl Marx's critique of capitalist exploitation. The section also addresses the ethical dimensions of wealth distribution, poverty, and economic inequality. 87. Philosophy and the environment, ethics of sustainability. This section explores the environmental ethics surrounding sustainability, addressing the moral obligation humans have toward the planet. It covers ideas from deep ecology, which advocates for the intrinsic value of all living things, and ecofeminism, which links the oppression of women with the exploitation of nature. The section also discusses the ethics of climate change and the responsibility to future generations. 88. Philosophy and social change, theories of revolution. This section looks at philosophical perspectives on revolution and social change, addressing the ideas of Karl Marx, who argued that social revolution is necessary to overturn capitalist oppression, and Jean-Paul Sartre, who linked existential freedom with revolutionary change. It also examines modern revolutionary movements and the philosophical questions they raise about justice, equality, and power. 89. The ethics of animal rights. Do animals have rights? This section explores the debate about whether animals have rights and how humans should treat non-human animals. It introduces the arguments of philosophers like Peter Singer, who advocates for animal liberation based on the principle of equal consideration of interests, and Tom Regan, who argues for the inherent value of animals as subjects of a life. The section examines the moral status of animals in relation to human interests and the ethical implications of practices like factory farming. 90. The philosophy of religion, arguments for God's existence. In this section, various arguments for the existence of God are presented, including the cosmological argument, the need for a first cause, the teleological argument, the design of the universe suggesting a designer, and the moral argument, the existence of objective moral values pointing to a divine creator. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and William Paley are discussed, alongside critiques from atheists like David Hume and Richard Dawkins, who question the validity of these arguments and the problem of evil. 91. The problem of evil. Can God allow suffering? The problem of evil is one of the most significant challenges to theism. This section discusses how different philosophers have approached the issue. The logical problem of evil questions how an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good God can allow evil to exist, while the evidential problem of evil examines the extent and nature of suffering in the world. Philosophers like Alvin Plantinga propose solutions, such as the free will defense, while others, like Epicurus, argue that the existence of evil is incompatible with God's nature. 92. The nature of the divine. What is God like? This section examines different philosophical conceptions of God. It contrasts classical theism, which holds that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, with pantheism, which identifies God with the universe itself, and process theology, which views God as evolving alongside the world. The section also touches on agnosticism, which argues that the existence and nature of God are unknowable. 93. Philosophy of science. What is science? This section explores the nature of science and its relationship with philosophy. It examines how science seeks to explain the natural world through observation, experimentation, and theory building, while addressing questions about the limits of scientific knowledge. Key topics include the scientific method, falsifiability, as proposed by Karl Popper, and the theory-laden nature of observations, as discussed by philosophers like Thomas Kuhn and Paul Feyerabend. 94. The scientific revolution, how science changed the world. Focusing on the historical shift from medieval to modern science, this section explores the contributions of figures like Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton, who challenged long-held views about the cosmos and natural law. It examines the ways in which the scientific revolution redefined human understanding of the universe and laid the groundwork for the modern scientific worldview. 95. The philosophy of time. What is time? This section investigates the nature of time, asking whether it is real or merely an illusion. It contrasts different theories of time, including the block universe theory, which suggests that past, present, and future events all coexist, and presentism, which holds that only the present is real. It also explores the experience of time in human consciousness and its relation to space and motion. 96. Philosophy of mind. What is consciousness? This section delves into the mystery of consciousness, what it is and how it relates to the brain and body. It discusses dualism, as proposed by René Descartes, who believed the mind and body are separate, as well as materialism, which argues that mental states are reducible to physical processes. The section also addresses the hard problem of consciousness, as articulated by David Chalmers, which questions how subjective experiences arise from physical processes. 97. The mind-body problem. Are we our bodies? This section examines the philosophical problem of how the mind and body are connected. It looks at various theories such as Cartesian dualism, which posits that the mind and body are distinct substances, and physicalism, which asserts that everything, including consciousness, is the result of physical processes. The section also considers the implications of these theories for human identity, free will, and personal responsibility. 98. The philosophy of perception. How do we experience the world? This section addresses how we perceive the world around us and the nature of perception itself. It explores the question of whether our perceptions accurately reflect reality or are shaped by our mental processes. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who argued that we can never know the world as it truly is, and George Berkeley, who contended that perception itself constitutes reality, are central to the discussion. 99. The ethics of artificial intelligence. Can machines be moral? This section explores the moral implications of artificial intelligence, AI. It asks whether machines can be moral agents capable of making ethical decisions, and whether they can possess rights or be held accountable for their actions. The section also addresses concerns about the potential consequences of AI, such as the loss of jobs or the creation of autonomous weapons, and whether ethical guidelines should govern AI development. 100. The philosophy of history. What is the meaning of history? This section looks at the question of whether history has meaning or direction. It examines theories such as the idea of progress, as proposed by thinkers like Hegel and Marx, who saw history as a process of unfolding truth or liberation. The section also addresses the more nihilistic view, as articulated by historians like Friedrich Nietzsche, who argued that history has no inherent meaning or purpose. Thank you for watching and sleeping with us tonight. That was the first 100 sections. I hope you started off learning something and then you just focused in and got good sleep. Subscribe if you're up and hope to sleep with again next time.